Yoshi's Island. I will never understand this game's place in gaming. The sequel to Super Mario World replaced controlling Mario with everyone's favourite Skip disguised as a dinosaur. And people loved it. The graphics, the gameplay, the style. Whenever Yoshi's Island is mentioned, people love it, even going far as describing it as platforming perfection. If you ever get people to list their top Mario games though, you're going to hear Super Mario World, Super Mario Bros. 3, Super Mario 64 and Super Mario Galaxy 2, but never Yoshi's Island. For such a beloved, well-made game, it's kind of forgotten in a way. I think the not as good but is still fun Yoshi's Story is arguably more remembered in gaming than Yoshi's Island. I know it isn't a forgotten game, but for a game that was both highly critically acclaimed and adored by fans, shouldn't it be remembered more or have more of a place in gaming? I think there's a few reasons that might explain why this happened. Mario isn't the main character, it gets overshadowed by Super Mario World as they were both on the SNES. It hasn't been released on the Wii's Virtual Console, but I think the most likely reason is that it was such a one-off. It didn't start a game series or influence other games really, it just came and went without making any real impact to gaming. The sequel became Yoshi's Story, which wasn't as good and couldn't even be called a sequel really. After Yoshi's Island, the Yoshi's games became a mess. They didn't become completely bad, but they weren't anything special. But after 11 years after the original, Nintendo finally decided to make a true sequel, which I'll be looking at today. After all this time though, is it too little too late, or does it bring back the magic that the original had? Let's find out. There's two main things to note about this game before properly looking at it. First of all, while the original was a main console release, the sequel was made for the DS, hence being called Yoshi's Island's DS. This was definitely a smart move, and I would expect no less from Nintendo. Oh wait a second, that's the second thing to note. This game wasn't made by Nintendo. Instead, a company called R2 made it. Never heard of them? Well, let's have a look at what they've also done. Blink the Time Sweeper. Okay, I've never played the Blink games, but I heard they were alright. What else did they do? Yoshi's Universal Gravitation. Okay, I never played that game either, but heard it was okay, even though it did use the GBA tilt sensor. Right, what else did they make? Club Penguin Game Day. Now, I'm starting to lose some faith in R2 here, but maybe the Club Penguin Game Day was a good game in some way. So what else did they make? Oh god, no. No. There's no way. They made Vampire Rain? For anyone who doesn't know, Vampire Rain is considered one of the worst 360 games of all time, and I've played the horrible mess for myself, as I brought it for a friend as a joke. The game was bad in every single way. And let me get this straight. The people who made Vampire Rain also made the sequel to Yoshi's Island. To understand how bad this is, it's like if the people who made Superman 64 got put in charge of making Half-Life 3. Sure, it would actually end up getting made, but it's an awful idea. Okay, let's actually look at the game itself though, and hope that vampires are nowhere near it. The game starts off by quickly recapping what happened in the original before describing how Kamelek is back and is kidnapping babies again. Baby Mario and Baby Peach are let go, and luckily instead of Baby Mario being splattered on the ground, he lands among the Yoshis who decide to help him rescue Baby Luigi. If you wanted a story beyond save someone, I would assume you would be playing a Mario RPG rather than a Mario platformer. This game does actually include short cutscenes from time to time, which is a nice touch. In this game you play as Yoshi, or Yoshis, who controls completely different to Mario. Yoshi can eat the majority of enemies and once eaten can turn them into eggs. These eggs, that somehow follow you around, can be thrown to attack enemies, hit clouds and collect coins. It's best not to think how Yoshi can treat their eggs this way, or how Yoshi is probably a girl. But pretty much, to summarise, Yoshi is an awful parent. Yoshi also has the Flutter Jump. At any point during a jump, you can press the jump button again and Yoshi will kick his feet and stay in the air longer. It's not really a double jump as you don't gain much height from it, and you can do it repeatedly while falling. The Flutter Jump is something I had a problem with in the original Yoshi's Island, and I have the same problem with it here. You need it to slow you down as you fall, but it can be all over the place. Sometimes I can flutter jump for a while, and sometimes I just completely fall and don't flutter jump for no reason. It's not a large problem as you don't have to rely on multiple flutter jumps that often, And I have to say, overall, Yoshi controls great. The controls are unchanged from the original, so hardcore Yoshi fans will be right at home. The only notable change is that Yoshi's top speed is a bit less, and a run button has been added. When I first played this game, I wondered if I was playing a port due to how similar it was. Turns out I was wrong, as this game introduced different babies to ride Yoshi. The first is Baby Mario, who allows Yoshi to hit certain blocks and lets Yoshi run. Baby Peach, who has an umbrella who lets Yoshi ride air currents. Baby DK, who lets Yoshi climb vines and do some sort of charge attack. Baby Wario, who carries a magnet that attracts metal and coins. And lastly, Baby Bowser, who can shoot fireballs. At certain points at each level, you can change which baby you have, so you can't change the babies on the fly. The addition of the extra babies is done perfectly. They don't completely change the gameplay, but each one are fun to use and add a nice variety when playing through levels. They also add a new puzzle element to this game, where you need to decide which baby to use in which situation. Speaking of puzzles, the slower pace of platforming is what separates Yoshi's Island from normal Mario games. The 2D Mario platformers featured levels that were more like obstacle courses, where you had to avoid pits and enemies to reach the end goal. In Yoshi's Island, however, it's more focused on exploring levels and finding the secrets, so you're already running through making daring jumps and dodges. Yoshi's Island DS expands upon the slower pace by having longer levels with more multiple paths and puzzles. The collectables, flowers and red coins return from the original, but now there is one special coin hidden in each level. They're much harder to find than the flowers and red coins, but luckily don't affect your overall high score at the end of each level, so finding them is all its own challenge. I have to say that I prefer the level design here than in the original. As I mentioned, Yoshi's Island is more about exploring than reaching the end, which is why the health system is different than to Mario. Whenever you get hit, the baby on your back floats away and you have 10 seconds to get him back. This number can be increased by collecting small stars. However, the original game had so many ways you could instantly die, the most annoying being Bottomless Pits. Make one mistake and no matter how much you flutter jump, you were dead. In Mario, the Bottomless Pits made sense, as it's all about getting to the end and the pits were something in your way. In Yoshi's Island, however, when you spend most of your time collecting a load of items, only to accidentally fall into a pit, all your collecting in that area gets erased as you go back to the midpoint, and you have to do it all over again. Luckily for my insanity, Bottomless Pits are pretty much gone from this game, apart from when levels revolve around them. This makes searching for secrets in levels more fun overall, as you know that when you die, it's mostly your fault, rather than the game feeling cheap. Unfortunately, while instant deaths have been toned down for this game, the cheap enemies from the original haven't. Enemies can appear out of nowhere and will instantly spawn when their spawn point is off screen. It isn't too bad, as most of the time you can lick your baby back to you and move on, but you need to have 30 seconds built up to get 100% on a level, so expect frustration if you're a perfectionist. I mentioned how similar this game feels to the first one at the beginning, and most of that is because almost everything returns from that game in some shape or form. However, this game is creative in its own way. The biggest example of this is the first half of World 3. It features pirate shy guys, island hopping and large pirate ships to explore. It's awesome. Another area where this game does a great job is the bosses. Yoshi's Island had the first good bosses in a Mario game, and here they're just as fun. I would have expected them just to rip off the bosses from the first game, but none of them do beyond the first boss. The best boss has to be the Ghost, where he's invisible on the top screen, but if you look on the bottom screen it actually acts as a mirror showing his location. One thing that everyone can agree on is that games have become easier over the last 10 years. In the case of Yoshi's Island's DS though, they got the difficulty just right. The puzzles will make you think, but aren't impossible or too vague. The levels have checkpoints, but they aren't too frequent, but feature just the right amount to avoid any real frustration. This game only features 5 worlds however, unlike the original which featured 6. But due to how long the levels are now, I would say they're probably roughly the same length. Veteran Yoshi's Island players will probably beat this game without too much trouble, but the real challenge here is getting 100% in every level and unlocking all the bonus levels. There are also extra minigames throughout the game, but I didn't spend more than a minute or so on any of them. They're not bad, but you won't be coming back to set high scores for yourself. The graphics and style of the original are maintained for Yoshi's Island DS. It has the same wholesome feel and is just great to look at. Unfortunately though, while the game looks far from bad, I was a bit disappointed. The original pushed the SNES to its limits, and with this game being on the DS, I expected the game to push how good a 2D platformer can look on the DS. The thing I found odd was how simple the backgrounds were. I've read that they kept them basic on purpose so they wouldn't be distracting. I guess that makes sense, but some of the backgrounds are almost non-existent. Overall, a great looking game, I just expected a bit more. The music and sound is also well done with some good well-fitting tunes. When I play handhelds I mute the sound, but I turned it up to have a listen, and the main thing I noticed is that the baby's cries have been turned down a bit. It also seemed that the game features mostly original music, although the sound effects are all lifted from the original. Even though it's nice that the levels have been expanded, the fact that the levels are over 2 screens can get in the way. The only parts where this is a real problem though is the constantly moving levels, as the game counts the gap in between the screens, meaning you can get attacked off screen or miss a platform without knowing. A video game review is about whether a game is good or not. I think a more interesting question here though is Yoshi's Island DS a good sequel? It doesn't revolutionise or innovate the series, but it does recreate the original and builds upon it, and really I think that's all you can ask for in a sequel. For anyone who loved the original, you should love this game. I would recommend it to anyone who enjoys 2D platformers. This game sold well and got good reviews, but has been forgotten due to the large library of games the DS has. If you're a Nintendo fan, you owe it to yourself to pick it up. My score is 8.5 out of 10. It's a fun game to play, it's the sequel Yoshi's Island deserved, and it only doesn't get a higher score due to how cheap it can kinda feel sometimes.